tonight, but throughout the teen kids that are back here in the back, be praying for them as they're having their service there. And then remember our youth across the road at the Bible camp. I know they're just getting started with a new curriculum that Stephen was really excited about. They had a great crowd last week. You pray for them that they'll have a tremendous time down there tonight as well. Well, we're going back to the book of Esther tonight. We're going to go to Esther chapter 7. And let me do as I do every Wednesday night, take a couple of minutes here and kind of reset the stage, because as I know, there are people that miss from here to there, and all of us can't be here every single Wednesday night, and I understand that. So let me just kind of catch us all back up to where we left the story off. We started this study back several weeks ago in chapter 1, and in chapter 1, we came across this amazing story in the Bible, one of only 2 books named after a woman, and it's also an incredible story because God's name is never mentioned anywhere in the story, but God's presence is seen everywhere in the stories I've been trying to emphasize. And we've been talking about the fact that even when God is silent, that does not mean God is absent. And the book of Esther is one of the great testimonies to that truth. Well, in chapter 1, we see a bunch of people that are living in the Medo-Persian Empire. And what we talked about was the fact that if you know your Bible history from growing up in Sunday school or whatever, you'll remember that about 500, 600, 700 years before the birth of Jesus, the Babylonian Empire, led by Nebuchadnezzar, had came against the city of Jerusalem and the kingdom of Judah, where all the Jews lived there in the southern kingdom. They took the city of Jerusalem, conquered the kingdom, and they carried away thousands of young people that were Jewish, took them across the land on this long 500-mile journey to the land of Babylon. And there they became slaves and servants to the Babylonians. And they lived there for over 50 years. Now, during that 50-year period, the Babylonian Empire ceased to exist, but a new empire took its place, the Medo-Persian Empire. That's the one that's in control when this story begins, and it's that king that is the central figure of this story. Now, the king who is there, he has all of these Jews living in his land. Now, understand, as we've talked about, God had made it possible that the Jews had been given an opportunity to return home. After all those years, the word had come, if you want to go home, you can go home. You want to go back to Jerusalem, you can go back to Jerusalem, you can start over, you can try and build a life there, you're welcome to leave. And thousands did. But others decided to stay. Many of them, like the people in our story, had been born here in the land of the Medo-Persians, and this is all they had ever known. And so when the opportunity came, you can go home or you can stay, they decided, well, we're just going to stay. This is where our life is. This is what we know. We're going to stay here. Among those was 2 family members. One, Esther, who's this beautiful young girl whose mom and dad had died somewhere along the way. We don't know how. We don't know what happened. But we do know that her uncle, a man named Mordecai, had adopted her into his family, raised her as his own daughter. Okay, so that's the deal as we open up in chapter 1. In chapter 1, as you'll remember if you were here, the king and the queen got into a spat, as often happens, although this one's a really bad one. And the king decided, I'm going to banish her. She's out. She's no longer queen. I'm going to take her title. I'm going to take her position. I'm going to divorce her. She's out. We're done with her. So the people around the king decided, and this takes us into chapter 2, they decided, well, you know what? We got to have a new queen. We can't just have the king with no queen. He's got to have a wife. So they started a contest. And the contest was, we're going to go throughout all the kingdom, this huge kingdom, and in every little village and every city, we're going to find the most beautiful young girls. We're going to bring them to the capital city, and we're going to let the king spend time with each one. And whichever one he decides, this is who I pick, that'll be the new queen. So this incredible contest is underway. Well, right there in the capital city where the palace is, in the city of Shushan, that's where Esther lives. And again, we don't know all the details. The Bible just doesn't say. But we do know that somehow along the way, Esther was chosen to be in this contest. So she, along with all these other hundreds of girls, they go in, and one by one they spend time with the king. And the king sees one beautiful girl after another beautiful girl. I mean, they were all good-looking women, okay? That's not a question. But when Esther came in, the king understood, now here's somebody that's not just beautiful on the outside, she's beautiful on the inside. Spent 5 minutes with Esther and said, hey, contest is over. That's who I want. That will be my new queen. So they sent everybody else home. Esther marries the king, and she becomes the queen. And then that takes us on into chapters 3 and 4, where we meet the villain of this story, a man named Haman. Haman is this guy, he's a political guy who becomes second in charge to the king. The king likes him, and so the king promotes him. The king doesn't seem to realize what an evil guy he is at heart, so he keeps promoting him. So eventually this guy Haman is the most powerful man in the kingdom other than the king himself. And so he decides, he gets the king to issue this order. Whenever you see Haman out on the street, coming in out of the palace, you got to bow down. You got to show him the same reverence that you would show me, the king. And everybody did. Everybody except Mordecai. Mordecai, for whatever reason, said, I'm not bowing down to that guy. A lot of speculation about this. We talked about it. Maybe Mordecai had met him somewhere. Maybe Mordecai knew something about him, knew how evil he was. But Mordecai just decided, I'm not bowing down to that guy. I don't care what the order is. I don't care what the consequences are. I'm not doing it. Well, eventually, Haman gets word, hey, there's this guy Mordecai. He's a Jew, and he will not bow down to you. And so Haman decided, okay, I'm going to show him. But rather than having Mordecai arrested or imprisoned or fined, here was his solution. This is how evil this guy is. Rather than dealing with the one person who had insulted him, Haman decides, I'm going to round up every Jew in this kingdom and have every one of them killed because of what that guy did. I'm going to kill them all. I'm going to kill every man, every woman, every teenager, every boy, every girl, every little baby. If they're Jewish, I'm going to kill them. And he goes to the king and he tells the king all these lies about the Jews, and he convinces the king, sign this order, and on a set day we're going to round them all up and we're going to kill thousands of them. We're going to be done with the Jews once and for all and forever. And the order's published, and now the Jews are in panic, including Mordecai. When Mordecai finds out what this guy is trying to do, he sends a note to Esther, his niece, who's now the queen, and he says, listen, you got to go in and you got to talk to the king. You got to tell him what's going on. You've got to save your people. And Esther resists at first because she explains, I can't just go into the king anytime I want to. If he doesn't summon me, I can't go in there. And if I just go in unrequested, I can be put to death. And Esther says, you got to do this. This is your moment, Esther. This is what God puts you in this position for. You've got to do it. And Esther decides, she says, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go in. If I die, I die. But I'm going to risk my life to save my people. And so as we saw in the story, she goes in. When the king sees her, not only is he not angry, he's thrilled to see her. Surely, probably, he hasn't seen her in several days, hasn't had time. And he sees Esther and he says, oh, there's my queen, come in, come in. He says, Esther, anything you want. He knew she needed something. And he says, whatever you want. He says, I'll give you up to half my kingdom right now. Just ask me anything you want. And she said, well, here's what I really need. I want to have a banquet that's just me, you, and your guy Haman. Just the three of us sit down and have a meal together. The king says, you got it. And so they get together and they have a meal together. And Haman is like, this is the greatest thing ever for him. He's like, look how important I am. The only person the queen invited besides the king is me. I must really be something special. So they have this meal, and the king is like, now, Esther, I know there's something on your heart. Tell me what you want. And Esther said, here's what I want to do. Let's have another meal tomorrow. Just the three of us again. And at that point, I'll tell you what I really need for you to do for me, king. King says, absolutely, anything for my queen. We'll all come back here tomorrow. Well, they all go home. Haman goes home, and he's like so excited. Look at me. Look how important I am. Not one day, but 2 days in a row, the queen invites me to this meal. Now, on his way home, guess who he saw not bowing down to him? Mordecai. And he goes home and he starts complaining to his wife and his friends. And he's like, there's this guy and he's driving me crazy. He won't bow down to me. I got all this good stuff going on, but this one guy. And as we talked about, an important principle there, so often in life we can have 99 good things going on in our life, but what's the one thing we focus in on? That one bad thing. We always focus in on that and we ignore all the good stuff. Well, that's what Haman's doing. So his wife, who must have been a peach herself, said, well, here's an idea. Why don't you build a gallows 75 foot high and hang him from that tomorrow? That's what you should do. So Haman calls his guys and he says, that's a great plan. And he puts them to work building the gallows overnight so I can hang Haman tomorrow. I'm going to go in, I'm going to see the king, I'm going to have lunch with the queen, then I'm going to kill that guy. I'm not just going to hang him from a 6-foot gallows or a 10-foot gallows. I want to hang him from a 75-foot gallows. That'll show him. So he goes to bed that night plotting murder. Well, that same night, the king goes to bed and he can't sleep. He's got insomnia. He tosses and turns. So he finally says, okay, I need somebody to read me something really, really boring, and maybe that'll put me to sleep. And so they get the book that has all the state records. You know, on this day we spent this much money. On this day you signed this law into effect. The king says, that's perfect. Read me that. That'll knock me out for sure. And they start reading. Well, as they're reading, they came across a story that happened way back in chapter 2. In chapter 2, a man named Mordecai, who was sitting outside the palace, heard a couple of guys plotting to assassinate the king. And he sent word to the king and said, hey, watch out. These two guys are going to try and kill you. There was an investigation. Turns out those two guys were trying to assassinate the king, and they were taken and they were executed. And there was a note put in the state records. This guy named Mordecai saved the king's life. And so when they read that, the king sat straight up and he said, wait. What did we ever do for that guy? That guy saved my life. Did we give him a reward? Did we do something? And they said, well, king, doesn't look like we ever did anything. And the king says, we got to do something. We got to do it now. He says, who's here in the palace that can do something for me? And they look around and they see, well, Haman's hanging around. Grab Haman. Bring him in. And the king looks at Haman and he says, Haman, what can I do to honor the most important man in my kingdom? And of course, when Haman hears that, who does he think the king's talking about? He's talking about me. I'm the most important man. I'm the one the queen's already invited to one meal. I'm invited again today. I'm the most important guy. The king wants to honor me. So Haman goes all out. He says, well, here's what I think you should do. Put the king's clothes on him. Put the king's crown on him, set him on the king's horse, and then parade him through town and have somebody walk in front saying, this is the man the king loves. And the king hears that and he says, that's a great idea. And Haman is like, oh my gosh, I'm about to get to wear the king's clothes, sit on the king's horse, wear the king's crown, and everybody's going to say, that's the man the king loves. Unfortunately, the king looked at him and said, here's who I want you to do that for, Mordecai. And he says, Haman, you're in charge. You put the clothes on him. You set him on my horse. You put my crown on his head. And then you lead him through town and you proclaim to everybody, this is the man the king loves. Now Haman's thinking, that could be a problem. That's the guy I want to execute later today. That's the guy I built the 75-foot gallows for today. And he realizes, I'm kind of in a jam. You don't say no to the king. So he says, okay. He goes and gets Mordecai, and he sets Mordecai on the horse, puts the king's clothes on him, puts the king's crown on him, parades him through town saying, this is the man the king loves. And as we talked about last week, don't you just know Mordecai was smiling? Not that he was getting this honor, but that who was having to do it? Haman. Because he knows how much Haman hates him. He knows Haman's the guy that's plotting to kill all the Jews. So it just had to tickle Mordecai to death to say, you know what, look at this. And he's thinking, although he never mentions God, you know they're all thinking, look what God did. Look what God did. So it's finally over, and Haman goes home, and he tells his wife and his friends, you'll never believe what happened. And he tells them what happened. They all know he's planning on killing that guy. And here's what they all told him. Here's what his wife told him. Here's what his friends told him. You are in big trouble. Have you ever noticed how things go from we to you? Remember when they were all plotting together and they thought they had it under control? It was, we'll do this and we'll do that. Now all of a sudden it's what? Oh, you in big trouble. You are in big trouble. Every married person who has kids knows how this goes. When the kids, like it's been all week, if you've been watching on Facebook, when those kids are going up there and getting those awards at the end of the school year, when they're in principals clubs and getting letters and all this stuff, you know what everybody's thinking? That's my kid. That's my kid. But when they get called to the principal's office for something else, you know what your son did? Now all of a sudden it's your kid. Not my kid, it's your kid. You know in the Bible the same thing happens? Do you know that God and Moses did the exact same thing? You remember when Moses was up on top of the mountain getting the 10 Commandments? And when everything was great, it was about, God is saying, these are my people. And Moses, yeah, these are my people, the Jewish people. And then all of a sudden, God looks down, and they're having this incredibly filthy party down at the foot of the mountain. And what does God say? get off the mountain and go straighten out your people. Those are your people. You go straighten them out. And Moses, as he's going down the mountain, you know what he's saying? Now, wait a minute, God. I'm going to go down there, but these are your people. Don't try and give them to me. They're your people. And it's back. That's just the way it's always been. Well, now Haman's in trouble, and everybody's like, oh, this is you. You know, gallows? What gallows? We had nothing to do with that. You were in big trouble. And so Haman is about to go to this luncheon. It's just the king and the queen and Haman. And he's already scared to death because he's afraid if the king finds out I was plotting to kill the man who I just honored at the king's request, the king's going to be really mad at me. Well, here's the truth. It's about to get a lot worse. Have you ever had somebody tell you, never say it can't get any worse than this? Don't say that. Because you know what? It can. It can always get worse. It's about to get worse for this guy. So let's pick it up in chapter 7. There's only 10 verses, but wow, the turn the story makes. So all that's over. The parade for Mordecai is over. And it says, so the king and Haman came to banquet with Esther the queen. So this is later that day. And now the queen's got this meal and everything prepared. So the king comes in, Haman comes in, Esther's there, and Haman is nervous as he can be because he's afraid what's going to happen if the king finds out what I was going to do with that guy he just had me honored. Now, the king said again to Esther on the second day, because remember, this is the second day of the banquet. He said on the second day of the banquet of wine, what is thy petition, Queen Esther? So no doubt they sit there, they eat, they fellowship a little bit, and the king says, okay, now my queen, I know there's been something on your mind. I could tell it that day you walked in. I could tell it yesterday. You tell me, what can I do for you? Because I want you to listen. As we said, this sounds like every husband, right? He says, it shall be granted thee. What is thy request? It shall be performed, even to the half of the kingdom. He says, whatever you want. Now, most husbands, especially if they're smart, they've been married a while, if the wife says, I need something, before you say yes, you say, what is it? You know, I'm not agreeing to anything that I don't know what it is. That's not the king. The king says, I don't even have to know what it is. It shall be done. As long as what you're asking is less than half the kingdom, it's done. Just ask me. I'll do it for you. And so, here it comes. Then Esther the queen answered and said, if I found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. Now remember, we've talked about this from week to week. What's the one thing the king doesn't yet know about Esther? That she's Jewish. She has kept that a secret the whole time. Now all of a sudden she says, King, I need you to do something for me and for my people. Guess who else is sitting there that doesn't know Esther's Jewish? Haman doesn't know it either. Now remember, here's what he does know. The king's just said, I'll do anything for you, queen. You're the love of my life. You're it. Tell me what you want. I'll do it. And she says, well, I need you to save my life and the life of my people. And here's why she needs it. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. Now stop for a second. When she said those words, now up to this point, Haman's just sitting there thinking, listening. He's got his own problems, you know, trying to figure out, how did I get in that mess with Mordecai? But when she says, me and my people have been sold, me and my people are under the threat of death to be destroyed, what do you think happened to Haman? His blood ran cold. There's almost no way to describe that feeling. Here's the closest I think I can come. And I know as I look across this crowd, what I'm about to say never happened to anybody here. But maybe you know somebody this happened to, and you understand what it means to all of a sudden hear something that makes your blood run cold. Since I know it never happened to anybody here, I'll say it this way. Did you ever know anybody in school, and while you were sitting in class, all of a sudden the loudspeaker crackled and came on, and they said, Miss So-and-so, would you please send so-and-so to the principal's office? I know that never happened to anybody here. But maybe you know somebody that happened to. Does that do it? When you're sitting in a class with 30 of your friends and all of a sudden somebody comes to the loudspeaker and says, the principal wants to see, and they call out your name, you know what happens? Your blood runs a little cold. And you're like, uh-oh, what did I do? Of course, most of the time we already know what we did. What we're really thinking is, not what did I do, how did they find out? That's really what we're wondering. Well, Haman's blood is running cold. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, that is for slaves, I'd held my tongue. In other words, if the person behind this had just tried to sell us into slavery, I wouldn't have said anything. Although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Now she's dropping an atomic bomb into this conversation. Here's what she's saying. There is somebody in your kingdom that wants me dead and wants all of my people dead. Haman's sitting there and he knows she's talking about me. He's sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, she's Jewish. I didn't know the queen was a Jew. And he understands, if I thought I was in big trouble up in that gallows, I'm really in big trouble now. The king is sitting there puzzled. He's like, what are you even talking about? Who is trying to kill my queen? Then the king, to say again, he has no idea. You say, well, he signed the order. The king signed lots of orders. He's already forgotten all this. The king answered and said unto Esther the queen, who is he and where is he that dares presume in his heart to do so? Now what do you think Haman's doing? If he was smart, he'd be sliding for the door, right? Can you imagine sitting there? It's just 3 people. The queen just dropped this bomb. There is somebody in your kingdom that is plotting to kill me, your queen. They're also plotting to kill all my people. The king loves her. We get it. Remember, every time she asks for something, I'll give you half the kingdom. He loves this woman. And now he is enraged and he says, tell me who dares to put their hands on my queen. Who dares to even think about that? And you can just kind of see Haman drawing up, trying to get as small as possible because he knows what's coming. And Esther said, the adversary and the enemy is this wicked Haman. They're sitting there. Here's this guy who walked in thinking, I'm so important, I'm so special, even the queen loves me, I'm the 3rd most important person in the kingdom, I am the guy. And all of a sudden, Esther points her finger right at his chest and says, that's the man. He is trying to kill me. And he's trying to kill all my people. That's the man. And again, we can only imagine the fear. But here it is. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. That's one of the great understatements in the Bible. Just saying he was afraid. He was scared out of his mind. He knows how much trouble he's in. Now watch. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden. Have you ever seen somebody get so mad they had to walk out of the room for a second? I mean, they were like, I can't even speak right this second. I just got to walk out for a second. So the king gets up. He is furious. And he stomps out of the room. And here is where Haman, he's sitting there thinking, okay, I had to parade Mordecai around. I'm going to be in trouble because I was planning on killing this guy. And now I find out the king loves this guy. Then he finds out I was going to kill all the Jews, and then I find out the queen is a Jew, and she just told the king, I'm trying to kill her and all her people. Here again, he might just be thinking, it can't get any worse than this. And again, he would be wrong. It's about to get worse. The king walks out of the room. And so Haman makes one last fatal mistake. And Haman stood up to make requests for his life to Esther the queen. For he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Haman gets up and he's like, the king walked out of the room. This is my chance to beg the queen for my life. And you can imagine what he's saying. The queen, I didn't know you were Jewish. I didn't mean all that. I didn't know that Mordecai was your uncle. I didn't know the king loved Mordecai. This is all a great big mistake. It's all a big mistake. He's saying all the things people normally say when they get caught, right? And he's saying, please tell the king to spare my life. Because he saw that look on the king's face. And he knows, I'm a dead man. Unless I can convince the queen to ask the king for mercy for me, I am a dead man. And then he does something that ensures that he's a dead man. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman was fallen upon the bed whereon Esther was. Uh-oh. Here's this guy pleading for his life. I mean, he's pleading for his life. Esther, which was, the custom in the Near East part of the world, they didn't sit in lazy boys, like we do. They had these couches or beds that they reclined on and things like this. And so she's laying there. He has fought. He is begging for his life, but the mistake he made is he fell across the bed where the queen is laying. The king doesn't know what he's doing. The king doesn't know he's begging for his life. The king walked out angry. He comes back. This guy is laying on the bed beside the queen. You don't do that. Not to a Near Eastern king who has the power of life and death. You just don't do that. Notice what the king immediately thought. Then said the king, will he force the queen also before me in the house? Now, without me getting graphic, you know what he's talking about. He's asking the question, is this guy going to rape my wife right in front of me? Is that how bad this is? I find out he wants to kill her. He wants to kill all of her people. I walk out of the room. I come back, and it looks like now he's going to try and rape my wife right here in front of me. And as soon as the word went out of the king's mouth, they. Who's the they? These are the king's guys. Remember, in those days, I know a lot of people are excited about the royal wedding coming up this weekend. A lot of people, and I do. Years ago when I got to I love the pageantry. I love English history. I love all that. But understand something. The Queen of England, that's a ceremonial deal now. She has no power. It's for tourists, basically. But in the Medo-Persian world, in this moment, the king was not a figurehead. What the king said was the law of the land. There's no parliament. There's no Supreme Court. There's no, I'm going to appeal what the king said to somebody. No. What the king says is done and done immediately. And the king is always surrounded by guards who will lay down their life for him. And when they see the king walk in and they hear what he says, this guy's trying to rape my wife, they don't have to wait for anything else. They immediately take a bag, throw it over this guy's head, and secure him. They're like, we know what the king wants. He wants this guy taken into custody right now. And isn't it interesting? The last thing he ever saw was the face of the woman who represented the people he was trying to kill. It's kind of ironic. So the king says, Harbona, one of the chamberlains, that's one of the king's guys, said before the king, behold also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman hath made for Mordecai. The king is like, what are we going to do with this guy? I want this guy dead, and I want him dead now. I just don't know how I want him dead. And one of the guys said, well, here's an idea. He had a gallows built that's 75 foot high. We could use that. You think the king's going to go for that? Immediately. He built this gallows 75 feet high. It was spoken good for the king. Standeth in the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him thereon. There's how swift justice was back then. There's no trial. There's no lawyers. There's no appeal. The king, they said, well, hey, you're looking for a way to get rid of this guy? Just so happens he built a gallows 75 foot high. He was going to try and kill Mordecai. You know the guy you love? He was going to try and kill him too. Besides the queen and besides all her people, the king said, you take him and hang him from his own gallows and do it right now, which they did. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. Then the king could kind of relax. He was like, that guy thought he was going to kill my wife. That guy thought he was going to kill my wife's people. That guy thought he was going to assault my wife right here in my own house. And justice was immediate. Now, let me give you this and we're going to close. One of the things I was sharing with my Sunday school class last Sunday out in the fellowship hall, we were talking about why we need to be fishers of men, why we need to tell people the gospel message. And a lot of you have heard me say this before, but here's why. Christianity is what we would call counterintuitive. Counterintuitive, the word intuitive means if something is intuitive, it means something that you can figure out. You can just kind of figure it out. It's intuitive. You can figure it out. I'll give you the classic example. Gravity was an intuitive discovery. You've heard the old story and legend, but you've heard the story about how Isaac Newton was sitting out under the apple tree one day, and all of a sudden an apple came loose and fell down and hit him in the head. And he was like, oh, you know what I just figured out? There is a force that pulls everything to the earth's surface. No matter how heavy it is, no matter how light it is eventually pulled down to the surface of the earth. And that force was eventually named gravity. That was something he could figure out intuitively. By just observing, by looking, by watching, he could figure it out. If something is counterintuitive, that means you'll never figure it out just by looking or examining or studying it. You'll never just figure it. It'll never just come to you. Now, that's what Christianity is. Christianity is counterintuitive. No one will ever figure it out on their own. Now here's what I share in my class, and I'll give you real quick. Every major world religion from time immemorial has come to three realizations. These are intuitive. These are things you can just figure out. Every major civilization has figured out, number one, that there's got to be a God or some form of higher power. Every civilization has figured that out. It's intuitive. Now you say, well, how do they figure it out? Here's how. They look at the creation around them. They look at the complexity of life. They lay on the ground at night and look up at the stars in the sky, and they understand this couldn't have just happened. Somebody made this. Somebody bigger and stronger and more powerful than any of us, they made all this. So every civilization intuitively comes to the idea there is a God, there is some form of higher power, whatever it is they call him. Here's the second thing every major civilization eventually figures out. There is life beyond the grave. That when you die, that's not the end. Every major civilization has come to that realization. You say, how do they figure it out? It's really simple. You know what everybody eventually figures out when you get up to be 60, 70 years old? This life goes by really, really quick. This life is so short. And so eventually people figure out, this can't be the whole deal because this is so short. This is the blink of an eye and it's over. There's got to be something else beyond the grave. So civilizations have figured that out. They figured out there's a God. They figured out there's life beyond the grave. And here's the third and final thing every major religion has figured out. And that is that somewhere out there beyond the grave, evil people will be punished. Good people will be rewarded. You know why people come to that realization? Because here's what they realize. In this life, Are all or even most evil people punished and held accountable for what they do? No. We say it all the time. Oh, that guy's getting away with murder. Literally sometimes. All evil people aren't punished in this life. And by the way, are all good people rewarded in this life? No, not even close. And so civilizations for thousands of years have figured out, you know what? There's got to be this day of reckoning somewhere beyond the grave where finally good people are rewarded and evil people are punished. Those are the three things that kind of intuitively come to them. Now understand, in this story, was an evil man punished? Yes, he was held accountable. But is what happened to Haman the norm? Is that what happens to all evil people? Are good people like Esther and Mordecai rewarded like they were in this story? No, this story is the exception, not the rule. Every major religion figures out there is a God or a higher power, whatever we're going to call him. There is life beyond the grave. There has to be, because this life is so short. There's got to be something else. And that somewhere in that next life, there's a day of reckoning where evil people are punished and good people are rewarded. That's where every major world religion gets to. Here's why you and I have to share the gospel. No one will ever figure out Christianity on their own. Nobody will ever sit under the apple tree and think about these three things and all of a sudden say, I got it. I got it. Here's what happened. There is a God who made all this. And here's what he did. He had one son, one and only son. He named him Jesus. His son came to this world in the form of a man like us, lived a life, and since he never sinned, since he lived a perfect life, he was able to die on a cross and pay for my sin since he had no sin of his own to pay for. Then 3 days later, he got up out of the grave, went back to heaven, and now if anybody will put their faith in what he did, they can go when they die and live forever and ever in heaven. Is anybody ever just going to figure that out? No. If you're here tonight and you're a Christian, you can have become a Christian a lot of different places through a lot of different ways, okay, in terms of how it happened in your life. But here's the one thing we all share in common. If you're a Christian, somebody told you the story of Jesus. You're never just going to figure that out. Somebody had to fill in the blanks. Somebody had to come along and say, yeah, there is a God, there is life beyond the grave, and there is a day of reckoning, but here's what else you need to know. Here's the story of Jesus. And the great example of that is found in Acts chapter 8, where the Ethiopian eunuch had gone to Jerusalem trying to figure this all out. He had figured out there's a God, there's life beyond the grave, there's a day of reckoning out there, but I don't know what to do. And God sent Philip to him. And you remember Philip jumped up in the chariot and began to preach unto him what? Jesus. He had to fill the blanks in. Somebody filled in the blanks for us. Haman got his day of reckoning that he deserved. Evil was punished, good was rewarded. It's a true story. It's an actual story, but it's also a picture of something that's coming one of these days beyond the grave. And what all of us need to do is to make sure that we know more than that there's a God out there somewhere, that there's a life beyond the grave, and there's a day of reckoning somewhere. We need to know that we know that we know that we have heard that Jesus Christ was God's Son, came to this world, made a way for us to be saved, and that we put our faith and trust in Him. We need to know that. And then we need to understand all these people around us, they need somebody to fill in the blanks for them. They need somebody to tell them. Here's the rest of the story that you need to know. That's why it's so important for us to invite people to church, for us to share our faith, because that's the only way they'll know. Paul put it like this in Romans: how shall they hear without a preacher? And he wasn't talking about a preacher like me. He was talking about somebody who will proclaim the truth. In other words, he's asking, how will they know if nobody tells them? It's our job to tell them. So let's do that. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this time. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. Thank you for this wonderful story from the Bible, God, that has so much to say to us, so many principles we can pull out of it, so many directions we can look at it and figure out some things. But God, I pray that the thing we'll figure out tonight is that evil is not always punished like it was in this story. Goodness is not always rewarded like it was in this story. But Father, there will be a day out there somewhere in that next life. There will be a day of reckoning. There will be a day where we will all be held accountable. And Father, the one thing that we all have got to make sure of is that somewhere along the way in our life, there was a moment where we realized, I'm a sinner. I need a Savior. I want to put my faith, my trust, my hope in Jesus Christ. Father, if there's somebody here tonight that's not